for it. I'm going to bring it to you. Shaun's going to tell y'all how he catches these big fish, what he uses, what bait he uses, the tackle, and all that. And we'll let him come back here and tell you in just a second what he does.
What's up, lifers? So today we're going to talk about the catfish equipment that we used to catch them big fish a couple weeks ago. So first off, I'm going to say I don't get endorsed by nobody, so everything I'm telling you is what I use. I'm not saying it's the best out there, but it's what I use. I use 3 different reels. I've got a Daiwa Saltus. It's a 40 is the size on it. I use a Boo Garcia 7000 Catfish Special, and my favorite reel is the Shimano Takata 600. All of them are pretty equal as far as the strength of them. I like the Dakota and the Daiwa Saltus better because you can actually take and lock down your reel to your rod, not just use a reel seat. The rods that I use are Tangling with Catfish Extreme Series. They're a medium heavy is what I use. You got to have some backbone to get them big fish in, and they got a real good backbone to them. My fishing line that I use is Berkley Prospect Chrome 40 pound. I fished with braid for a long time. I just recently switched to mono, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. And it goes down to a crane swivel. It's a 3-way swivel that I attach my dragging weight to. I'll show you that here in a minute also. My leader line is 80 pound. Bass Pro Shop brand. It's a Tight Line or something like that. I'm really not for sure. I have to look it up to make sure, but I think it's Tight Line is what it's called. But it's 80 pound. On the business end, I run a 10-aught circle hook. It's made by Hooker Tackle. It's called the Reaper. That's the hook that I like. I like running circle hooks. This one has some beads in this right here. It's a little line rattle is what it's called. And then I run what's called Demon Dragons. There's just several names for these now, but it's got a little rattle in it, and it works as a peg float is what it does. Some of them I run them on, some of them I don't. I can't tell you whether they're make it any better or make it any worse. I think it's just whatever you want to fish with. You know, I've caught fish with them and I've caught fish without them, so it's just personal preference. But these rods right here, all 3 of these rods are set up for dragging baits. My setup's a little bit different. When I'm anchored, not much. You know, when I'm anchored, I don't have a float on there, and I've got a lot shorter leader because usually when I'm anchored, I'm fishing in pretty shallow water. One thing I did forget to mention is a chain swivel. This is a 110 pound chain swivel. There's several companies out there that make them. I can't remember who makes this one. But what it does is that when you get them big fish on there and they start to roll, it lets that roll. See, I can roll that and my line will never turn. That way they can't roll off. That's a good thing to have when you're going after these big fish. As far as bait goes, shad. Shad's what I usually use 99% of the time. Depending on the time of the year, depending on the fish, is what size shad that I use. Matter of fact, the video that you seen earlier, that fish was caught on a smaller shad head. Wasn't a very big bait at all. Sometimes you catch them on big bait, sometimes small bait, sometimes it don't matter what size bait you use. But that's one thing I tell you to do is when you're fishing for them, to try different baits. And if you're catching them more on a small head versus a big midsection, go to all heads. If you're catching them on both of them, just keep it like you're going. You just got to try it to see what they're biting on the best. As far as dragging goes, the reason why I switched to mono was because when you're dragging them baits and you got your planer boards out or you got a lot of line out, when you're fishing in them waves, you know, your rod tip's steadily popping like that. And of course it goes all the way down to your bait, and it's the bait presentation. Your braid doesn't have any stretch in it, so everything that rod tip's doing is going down there to that bait. Whereas your mono's got some stretch in it, and it kills that popping, and it gives a better bait presentation. All right, talking about the planer boards that I was talking about. These are planer boards. These are spread 'em planer boards. I've actually got a buddy of mine that makes these. He's up there in Texarkana, Arkansas. These are the best boards on the market in my opinion. I'm not just saying that because he's a friend of mine. I think he's done a tremendous job in building them. They're all welded. They're built out of good material and they're real strong. What the planer board does is when you're dragging baits, if I was just to throw the rods out there off the boat and drag without using these, well then I would have, this is a 22-foot boat, and I wouldn't be covering but, 25, 28 foot of water is all I'll be covered, and you have your lines just stacked in there. What the planer boards do is it kind of acts like a float in a way, but you attach the swivel, your line goes through here and you lock it in, and then you clip the clip on your line, and this locks your line in place. So then when you let it out and you get it to the right depth or the farthest distance back that you want to fish, you engage your reel, and of course it tightens up. And what it does, if you can see on this side right here, this is a right side. So that line pulls in here and it pulls it and it causes it to swim out. With the way that it is, you got your line coming down to here and it puts it out, and when you put pressure on it, it causes it to swim, and it swims out away from the boat. Like I said, this is the right side, so you'd put on your right side of your boat, whether you're fishing off the back or off the side, it goes to the far right side, and like I said, that's what it does, is it causes it to pull, and then it makes it swim out. They come with, each set comes with two. And of course this is the left side, and it does the same thing the right side does, except it makes it pull to the left. And it's a good way, the farther you let it out, the farther it'll pull to the left or to the right. So you can actually space them out, put your main, your farthest two as far back as you want them, and let them spread out so far. Then you put two more out and don't let them out as far, and they only swim out so far, so you're covering a bigger area of water.
Hey, I'm gonna ask you a question right here.
Yes, sir.
Does he have a website?
No, sir, but I know on Facebook you can go to,
He's on Facebook?
yeah, he's on Facebook, Spread 'em Planer Boards.
Okay. I'll try to list a link to that in the description, folks.
Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about your depth that you fish. If you look right now, all my leaders are about the same distance, so they're going to be the same distance from the bottom. So what I usually do is I'll take a look at my graph and see where most of them fish are at, what part of the water column they're at. A big misconception is catfish are bottom feeders. That is not true. I catch a lot of my fish way up in the water column. They'll cruise the bottom, but catfish eyes are on the top of their head. They feed up. So
all the bait that they're looking at is above them. So you look, see where the bait's at, the boat, you might be in 40 foot of water and the bait's in 15. Well, them fish are going to be feeding in 15 foot of water. So you always look at your graph, try to find out where your fish are at. Sometimes when they're not feeding, they'll be right on the bottom. That doesn't mean they won't eat a bait when it comes by. It just means they're not actively feeding. So then if you've seen a lot of fish closer to the bottom, you want to adjust your leader shorter to get it closer to the bottom. So on my dragon weights, what I was telling you earlier about this swivel right here, this three-way swivel. The dragon weights I use, I made. They're 2 ounces, between 2 and 3 ounces, depending on what size bait that I'm using. It depends on what size dragon weight that I'm using. Most of the time they're 3 ounces. It's just got a swivel on here, and you hook it to that three-way swivel and lock it in. And what that does is when you're drifting, you got this float on here. This is the only thing touching the bottom. So you're coming up like this. When you're dragging them baits, that's your presentation. This is going to float that bait up. Your weight's going to be on the ground, so that's how far off the bottom that I'm going to be. Like I said, depending on where the fish are, I might have a leader on here that's 3 foot long. Just depending on the fish. But that's how I drag my baits, just like that. Like I said, that weight, and the reason why I run this type of weight is
is you can run bank sinkers, you can run, different type of sinkers, but with dragging, you drag through a lot of structure, a lot of deadfalls, a lot of tree limbs, going up inclines, and what this weight does is it keeps you from getting hung up as much. I'm not saying you can't get hung up with it, but you don't get hung up near as much because like I said, the slenderness of it and the length of it lets it just go right on through and jump over trees and stuff, where your traditional bank sinkers and stuff will take and get underneath that log, and they'll take and get hung up and won't allow you to jump over. But that's the reason why I use these when I'm dragging, because you're covering so much structure. Anchor fishing, I'll use a bank sinker because you're not dragging on any structure. You throw it in, and where you throw it in is where it's going to stay till you reel it in. So it's not as critical. But like I said, when you're dragging baits, it's critical to have a good weight that'll get over that structure and won't get hung up, because you don't want to stay hung up all the time. That's no fun. Plus it gets pretty dang expensive. Y'all know what the cost of lead is nowadays.
I see some people putting BBs in them when they make them, like for BB rifles. You don't do that, you use lead?
I use lead. That's what I use. I'm not saying you can't use BBs. I just had the access to the lead weights, and that's what I used.
Anything else you want to tell them?
As far as when you're dragging baits, as far as the speed, most of the time if you get there around 0.5, so half a mile an hour, that's pretty much the speed that you want to stay, give or take a little bit. The colder the water temperature, the slower you want to go. I wouldn't go anywhere below 0.3, but the bite, they're going to be a little bit more, not near as active as far as their speed and everything, so that's why you want to slow down. If you're drifting in when it's in the middle of summertime at night, when the water temperature is way up, you can get by with running, 0.8, 0.9, because they've got a lot more energy and a lot more speed to them. But depending on the water temperature, most of the time, if you stay around 0.5, that's a good average speed. You'll do just fine.
What water temperature are you talking about staying at 0.5, like 50 and below, or 60 and below? Or?
No, probably about 65 to down to probably about 40, 45. I'll stay at 0.5. If it gets down below 45, I'll probably take and slow down a little bit.
All right, people, that's in East Texas. That may not work where you're at, but that's the way he does
Right.
it in East Texas.
And there's a big difference too between dragging. A lot of in the Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, they call lakes aren't what we call lakes here in East Texas. Their lakes have current. Our lakes don't. What their lakes they're calling lakes are is just a river, and they got a dam here and a dam at the end of it, and
They produce power with the dams.
some of them do.
Yeah.
Some of them are flood control, but they call them lakes between the two dams. Whereas here what we call a lake is a body of water that has got a river that feeds it. Of course, it's got a dam spillway on it, but most of the time we don't have current. And their lakes, what they call lakes, do have current, and the fishing's kind of a little bit different as far as the way you fish it. They can suspend fish a lot of theirs, and they're a lot deeper. They fish 60, 80 foot of water. You're not going to find much 60 and 80 foot of water in any of our lakes here in East Texas. So as far as locating fish, structure, and when I say structure, I don't mean, a lot of people when you say structure, they mean a deadfall or limbs or standing timber or anything like that. For catfish, structure can be just a
Bump in the bottom.
bump in the bottom of the lake, and it can only rise, it could be completely flat and have a rise in it that's not but a foot different. Well, that's the structure that catfish relate to, and they like to hang around structure. But the main thing as far as for looking for them is you got to look for bait. And like right now on a lot of our lakes around here, the bait is stacked real good. And you can actually get a false read them on the bottom because the bait's actually stacked in there so thick. And you really don't want to be dragging baits through that because it's hard for a catfish to determine your bait from other bait. So, it'd be kind of hard. Not saying that you can't catch a fish doing that, but what I like to try to find is pockets of bait away from the main wad of bait. and that's where your fish are mighty going to target. You know, you got better chance of a bite and something like that.
When you're fishing catfish like that, do you look like I do for birds locating the bait when I'm bass fishing?
Yes.
Okay.
So you got your birds will take and start hitting the water, and what happens is you got fish pushing that bait up to the top. And of course, your birds are coming down getting the bait that's on top. But the only thing about that is when you look out there and see birds working, you know there's bait being pushed up to the top. You don't know what kind of fish is doing it. A lot of these lakes that we fish around here for these big blues, they've got stripers, they've got hybrids. So you might be a school of hybrids or stripers doing it, but you don't know unless you check.
Both of them are fun to catch, people.
Yes, they are. But you know, and it's kind of one of them deals. You just don't want to be going and running in a school. A bait's been pushed back to the top, even though you know fish is feeding on them. Just see what kind of it is, because you'll actually spook them off, and they'll, you know, you'll mess the whole thing up. So you can take and actually stop, you know, 75, 100 yards from it, and troll in to see what's going on, try not to spook anything. Or you can actually set 75, 100 yards away from which way you're going to drift or drag baits, and take and go into it and see what happens. When you hear the term drift and drag, they're the same thing. It's just there's two different methods. So your drifting is when you're letting the wind move the boat. To control your speed, you use what we use is drift socks. Depending on the amount of wind, depends on the size of the drift sock. I've got 3 drift socks that I have in my boat at all times. I've got a 54, a 66, and a 78. And depending on the wind speed, depends on what size drift sock that I need to get my boat down to where I'm only moving that half mile an hour. So drifting, you're letting the wind move you. Dragging baits is when you use the trolling motor. So what I'll do on days that there's not enough wind to get me to that half mile an hour is I'll drop my trolling motor. I know where I want to go. I'll set my speed on my trolling motor to get me to that half mile an hour, and I'll throw my poles off the back of the boat, and I'll drag baits, because you're actually pulling the baits. That's where you get the dragging, is you're pulling the baits with the motor.
You got GPS on your trolling motor?
I do have my trolling motor is programmed with the GPS. I do not use it. I've got 2 graphs that I use. Most of the time, one of them I just have on my GPS and my graph, and my navigational graph. The other one is the one that I use for my sonar. I do have a side scan, down scan, but most of the time I'm using either down scan or I'm using traditional sonar.
It's a lot like bass fishing, folks. Deep water bass fishing.
Yep. Well, you know, when you say that deep water, one of the funnest times to catch big catfish is in late March, 1st of April. And your water temperature's up, and your big catfish, they move in shallow water. I've caught some big catfish in real skinny water. It's fun, because they really fight when you get them in that shallow water. When you get a 60-pound fish in 2.5 foot of water, he puts on a show.
When they're moving up like that, is that because of spawn, or?
No, a lot of times, even in the winter, you know, taking in January and February, if the water temperature is 50 degrees on the main lake, and you have a couple days where it's like it is right now in the 60s and 70s, them fish will go shallow, and they'll go real shallow, because what happens is the temperature brings up your water back in your shallow water, back in your coves, warms up quicker than it does on the main lake. So you might have 50-degree water on the main lake, where you go back in the back of a cove and it might be 70 degrees. So your fish are moving in there because of the 70-degree water. Another real good time to do it is when it's not so much when you got a cold rain, but say you've been running in the temperature's been in the 40s and 50s for the highs, and your water temperature is in the mid or low 50s to mid 50s, even down in the 40s, and it kind of warms up and you get a warm rain, and it's a substantial enough rain that you've got fresh water coming in the back of them coves and them creeks. And that water coming in, you know, might be in the 60s, mid 60s. That's a good time to be back in that shallow water. Just get off right where that creek comes in at, because the catfish have moved up in there for two reasons. They moved up in there to feed because of the stuff coming out of the creek channels, and because of the warmer water. And you can catch big fish in shallow water. A buddy of mine caught an 81 pounder last year in 2.5 foot of water. So that's a pretty big fish in some really skinny water.
Well, Shaun, that was a pretty good talk you gave them. If they want to know if they got any other questions, they can just post them in there. If you don't read them, I'll send them to him and get him to answer them. Any of the products that I can find that he mentioned on Amazon, I'll list a link in the description. I'm going to try to find this man's that makes his spreader boards Facebook page and have it in the description. I know most of the guys at Catfish, they know him because everybody I see in Texas running them spreader planer boards.
They're good boards.
Y'all know what to do right here. Like, share, subscribe, and watch this whole video. It'll help me a lot right now. And we gone.